There is a financial secret hidden in pages that many read as just history. A code of prosperity that was born not on Wall Street, but on the throne of a king who asked for something that almost no one dares to ask for. Discernment. How many times have you had resources in your hands and still felt afraid to take the next step? How many doors have you seen closing because you lacked the vision to open the right ones? The richest man in history did not reach the top by force or inheritance. He arrived because he understood what not even the greatest economists have fully understood to date. True wealth is built with applied wisdom, strategic alliances, and a faith that sees beyond the visible. In this video, you will discover how Solomon structured an economic empire with fundamentals that today still drive investment funds, and why whoever absorbs this can experience a new dimension of growth. Stay until the end. There's a revelation in this content that could change the way you deal with money and the purpose behind it. Would you trust your investment portfolio to the richest man who ever lived? You may never have thought about it, but the principles that shaped Solomon's fortune still echo silently behind the scenes in the modern financial world. While large investment funds employ diversification tactics, international agreements, and market exploration, all of this was already, impressively, present in the mind and actions of the king who ruled Jerusalem more than 2,900 years ago. Unlike inherited or accidental wealth, Solomon's wealth was built with strategy, long-term vision, and an intelligence that transcended his time. What makes this even more fascinating is that their economic trajectory is recorded not in financial manuals but in the pages of Scripture. If topics such as wisdom, strategy, and purpose pique your interest, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Here, each biblical story reveals surprising connections to the challenges of today's world and can broaden your vision in profound, practical, and transformative ways. Solomon was not just a religious leader or a prominent figure in the ancient world. He was in practice an economic strategist whose influence went beyond the borders of his own kingdom. He governed a territory located in one of the most disputed and strategic regions of the ancient world, between trade routes that connected Africa, Asia, and Europe. This gave him a unique advantage, access to cultures, goods, and trade opportunities that few could dream of. And he knew how to explore each of them with precision. His name has become synonymous with wisdom, but it should also be associated with the art of investing with discernment. Solomon understood, as few did in his time, the value of leveraging diplomatic relationships to generate wealth. Not only did it seek agreements to maintain peace, but it made these pacts bridges for the construction of commercial routes and expansion of economic influence. His marriages to foreign princesses, for example, were not just political alliances, but keys that opened doors to exchanges and commercial partnerships with kingdoms such as Egypt and Tyre. The gold that flowed into Jerusalem was not just the result of taxation or internal control. It came from long journeys, from organized fleets, from international agreements that guaranteed access to exotic and valuable products. Solomon invested in commercial fleets that crossed the seas in search of rare goods, precious metals, and coveted raw materials. What he did in practice was expand his asset portfolio in an intelligent way, avoiding depending on a single type of source of wealth. In modern terms, it would be like investing in different asset classes, shares, commodities, real estate, and international funds. More than accumulating treasures, Solomon accumulated financial intelligence. His records show that he understood the logic of the economic cycle like few others. He stored when there was plenty, distributed wisely, valued knowledge, and encouraged productivity. He organized society so that there was no waste, establishing divisions of tasks and promoting commerce as an activity of central value. Jerusalem became not only a religious center, but also an economic hub, where caravans arrived loaded with goods from distant lands, and all this without technology, without stock exchanges, without central banks. Only with wisdom, well thought out, alliances, a sense of opportunity and courage to invest in the uncertain based on solid foundations. This is the type of vision that still inspires financial managers today, even if not everyone recognizes the origin of such strategies. Solomon's name may not appear in Wall Street reports, but the principles he applied are there silently, being reproduced in every smart investment decision. The mind behind the construction of the temple also designed paths of lasting prosperity, showing that spirituality and economic intelligence do not need to walk separately. On the contrary, when united by a greater purpose, they become transformative forces capable of changing the reality of a people and leaving marks that span generations. Solomon's economic wisdom can only be understood in light of the environment in which it flourished. His reign took place around the 19th century BC, a period in which the Middle East became increasingly interconnected by trade routes and diplomatic relations. Israel, under his government, stopped being just a territory with religious significance and also became a key part of the region's economic machinery. The geographical location was privileged. Between Egypt to the south and the great civilizations of Mesopotamia to the north and east, Israeli territory functioned as a corridor for the passage of goods, ideas, and cultures. But this position alone would not guarantee prosperity. It was the way Solomon knew how to use this point of contact between empires that transformed the scenario. By establishing peace with the people around him, Solomon created a stable environment where trade could flourish without the constant risks of invasion and conflict. Political stability was the basis for economic growth, and he knew it. There is no sustainable progress when tension consumes resources and energy. Thus, he invested in diplomacy with unusual strategic intelligence. He built alliances, cultivated respect among leaders, and used his image as a wise king to attract the trust of powerful nations. Egypt, for example, offered her daughter in marriage, and this gesture was not just symbolic. It was a seal of cooperation, an open door for exchange agreements and guarantees of a safe route for merchants. At the same time, Solomon strengthened ties with Tyre, a Phoenician port city that dominated maritime trade in the Mediterranean. King Hiram of Tyre became a key partner in the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, providing superior wood, experienced craftsmen, and, above all, access to naval fleets that would allow the expansion of trade to distant regions, such as Ophir. This cooperation was not an isolated episode. It was part of a deliberate strategy to expand influence through trade and economic interdependence. What for many would be just a religious or architectural alliance, for Solomon, it was a move to expand the market. The construction of the temple, in itself, was also an economic engine. It mobilized thousands of workers, boosted demand for materials, encouraged the exchange of construction technologies, and attracted pilgrims and traders. Each brick laid was part of a wealth movement network. The temple was not only a spiritual symbol, but also a showcase of prosperity and power, drawing international attention to Jerusalem. This generated symbolic and political capital, which was converted into negotiating power. In addition to diplomacy and infrastructure, Solomon reorganized the kingdom's internal administration to allow for more efficient management of resources. He divided Israel into 12 administrative regions, each responsible for supporting the palace for 1 month of the year. This division not only decentralized the weight of maintaining the court, but also stimulated agricultural production and local economic organization. It was a clever way to create collective responsibility while maintaining a constant flow of supplies to the capital. This organizational logic shows that Solomon did not rely solely on luck or divine inspiration. He was a manager, a systems architect, someone who understood the importance of processes, logistics, and planning. He created warehouses, collection centers, distribution routes, and even fortified cities at strategic points, such as Megiddo and Hazor, which functioned as administrative and asset protection centers. All of this allowed accumulated wealth to be stored, transported, and multiplied safely. The economy of Solomon's kingdom was based on circulation, and he ensured that this circulation was broad, diverse, and continuous. Instead of relying solely on taxes or exploitation of local natural resources, he connected Israel to a web of international trade, making its people not just consumers, but active participants in the generation of wealth. Peace, organization, and long-term vision transformed a relatively small nation into a respected power whose influence was felt far beyond its borders. Despite his impressive power structure and applied intelligence, Solomon's legacy also raises questions and provokes discussions that stand the test of time. His name is synonymous with wisdom, but it is also shrouded in controversy and paradoxes. The greatness of his reign generated admiration, but his trajectory was also marked by decisions that fueled criticism and raised warnings about the dangers of excess and self-sufficiency. The accumulated wealth, the palaces built, the luxury in which he lived, all of this attracted looks from inside and outside the kingdom, and not all of these looks were of reverence. The Bible reports that silver became so common in Jerusalem during his rule that it seemed to have no value. Golden objects multiplied in the palace halls, and treasures were stored on a large scale. For many, this level of abundance was a sign of divine blessing, but others saw it as a possible imbalance. After all, when accumulation becomes an end in itself, the risk of losing the original purpose increases. Solomon, who began by asking for wisdom to govern justly, found himself over time surrounded by pressures, desires, and influences that tested his principles. A point that raises reflections is the high number of marriage alliances he signed. There were hundreds of wives and concubines, many coming from foreign nations. If on the one hand these unions sealed treaties and strengthened diplomatic ties, on the other, they also introduced customs, beliefs, and religious practices different from those that supported Israel's faith. By allowing altars to other gods to be erected to please his wives, Solomon opened space for the infiltration of ideas and values that confronted the principle of fidelity to God. This opening brought spiritual tensions to the kingdom and later became one of the elements mentioned as the cause of its downfall. These decisions raise questions relevant to the present day. At what point can the search for expansion, influence, and wealth compromise the essence of a successful project? How far can strategic alliances be maintained without the ethical foundation being corrupted? Solomon makes us reflect on the fine line between wisdom and pride, between strategy and excessive ambition. His decline was neither immediate nor abrupt. The erosion began subtly, with small concessions, seemingly harmless decisions, but which, when added together, altered the axis of his leadership. Another issue that arouses curiosity is the fate of commercial fleets and the routes they established. The biblical text suggests that after his death, the empire began to fragment. The kingdom was divided, and many of the connections so carefully built were lost or weakened. This reinforces the idea that the sustainability of an empire is not just in the infrastructure, but in the continuous maintenance of the principles that sustain it. When ethical and spiritual foundations are neglected, even the most sophisticated economic machines begin to lose steam. Some scholars wonder whether Solomon was, in fact, the richest man in history. Modern calculations, based on the amount of gold received annually, suggest that his fortune would far exceed that of any contemporary billionaire. It is estimated that he received around 25 tons of gold per year, apart from profits from trade, taxes, and mining. If transported to current reality, this amount would put your wealth at almost unimaginable levels. However, it is important to note that this wealth was not just in coffers, but spread across projects, structures, works, and people. The most fascinating thing about this is that many of the models used by Solomon are replicated today, even if practitioners are not always aware of it. Investment funds based on diversification, multinational companies that establish partnerships with different cultures, risk mitigation strategies, and decentralization of resources, all of this goes back to practices he already used, adapted to his time. Solomon operated with a long-term vision, a balance between risk and security, and a keen eye for opportunities beyond immediate borders. The most serious criticism that can be made against him is perhaps not about material excesses, but about the deviation from purpose. The wisdom that took him to the top was the same wisdom he began to set aside when he began to trust his possessions more than their source. And this isn't just a reflection on an ancient king, it is a mirror for anyone seeking success, influence, and stability. The question is not just how much you have, but how much you remain faithful to what gave rise to what you achieved. Solomon's name has crossed the centuries as a symbol of wisdom, power, and prosperity, but perhaps its true heritage lies in the questions it continues to provoke. He built more than palaces or economic systems. He left a trail of ideas, principles, and warnings that live on, challenging each generation to think more deeply about what it means to be successful. Because your story is not just about achievements, but about the invisible foundations that support or collapse great achievements. The model he developed combined strategy and spiritual vision, showing that building wealth does not need to be blind, insensitive, or disconnected from a greater purpose. Solomon understood that finances and faith are not enemies. On the contrary, they can walk together when guided by wisdom. And this is perhaps the essence of his legacy. The idea that true value is not just in what is accumulated, but in the way it is managed, shared, and preserved. Solomon's financial decisions were not mere transactions. They were expressions of vision, of discernment, and at times of faith applied to concrete reality. His trajectory shows that economic intelligence goes far beyond the ability to generate profit. It includes reading scenarios, understanding cycles, managing people, controlling emotions, and sensitivity to what is lasting. Solomon was able to anticipate needs, establish productive connections, and cultivate environments where prosperity could expand. But it also showed the danger of moving away from the center that supports it all. As he allowed strange voices to shape his sensibilities, his clarity eroded. This does not erase its greatness, but it alerts us to what happens when the fundamentals are forgotten. This contrast between Solomon's ascension and deviations creates a tension rich with meaning. He proves that wisdom is not something that is achieved once and maintained automatically. It is a process, a continuous vigilance, a daily choice to align mind, heart, and action. The modern world, with its stock exchanges, digital currencies, international partnerships, and economic complexity, still surrenders to principles that Solomon already practiced in his time. Diversify, predict risks, maintain reserves, strengthen alliances, and invest with a vision for the future. All of this was present in his reign, but none of these actions would have value without the basis that supported them, the commitment to truth, to justice, to building something that was greater than oneself. It was when this commitment weakened that the system, however robust it was, began to show cracks. True wealth, as he himself wrote in his Proverbs, is in wisdom. She is more precious than gold, more valuable than jewels, more powerful than any army. When this compass is lost, the rest becomes fragile. It is no coincidence that centuries later, his teachings are still cited in books on leadership, administration, and finance. The world recognizes that there is something essential in the lessons he left, even if many ignore their spiritual origins. Solomon planted seeds that grew in different fields, and even in the most secular environments, the fruits continue to be harvested. It is as if he understood before anyone else that true intelligence is that which connects heaven with earth, the eternal with everyday life, the invisible with what can be built with one's hands. Looking at the life of this king, one question remains that goes beyond calculations, metals, and treaties. What truly sustains a prosperous life? The answer, it seems, is not just in full coffers, but in a clear mind and aligned heart, and the ability to maintain focus even when everything around invites you to deviate. Time passed, empires fell, markets changed, but the principles that govern wisdom remain, and whoever adopts them, even in silence, reaps fruits that last far beyond what gold can buy. The network built by Solomon was just the foundation of something even more ambitious, an economic system that did not depend on a single source of wealth, but operated on the basis of diversification. His intelligence stood out for his ability to understand where the value flows were and how to access them efficiently. Solomon did not focus his efforts only on what was within his borders. He understood that true power lay in the ability to achieve what was scarce and desired, even if it came from distant lands. Therefore, he established one of the largest commercial operations in antiquity, the Tarshish fleets. If this content makes sense to you, write in the comments, strategic wisdom. That's the key word that defines everything we're exploring here. I want to see how many are capturing the essence of this story. These vessels didn't just cross seas, they carried the name Israel as far away as the southern coast of Arabia, Eastern, Africa, and perhaps even areas near present-day India. The Bible describes that every 3 years fleets returned loaded with gold, silver, ivory, precious stones, sandalwood, monkeys, and peacocks. This diversity of assets indicates that Solomon invested in a wide range of assets. In contemporary language, it would be like investing capital in emerging markets, rare commodities and exotic sectors with high appreciation potential. But none of this would be possible without logistical planning. Managing a maritime operation of this size required not only robust vessels, but knowledge of winds, seasons, trade routes, supply points, and negotiation with foreign peoples. Solomon did not sail, but he had experts at his side such as the Phoenicians of Tyre, who mastered naval art. With this, he transformed Jerusalem into a center of commercial control, even though it was geographically far from the sea. What seemed like a disadvantage, he converted into a command point, coordinating the flow between ports, land caravans, and distribution centers. In addition to maritime trade, there was also dominance over land routes that connected the Arabian Peninsula, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Solomon controlled strategic points such as Etzion-Geber, a port city on the Gulf of Aqaba, which served as an outlet for southern trade. It was there that spices, incense, myrrh, fine fabrics, and metals passed through. The Israeli presence in these locations expanded the reach of the commercial network and increased the king's influence over prices, supply, and circulation of products. The impact of this was profound. Not only did it increase the volume of wealth entering the kingdom, but it also strengthened Solomon's image as a ruler with control over regional economic flows. While expanding external connections, Solomon also kept his eye on internal production. He invested in the development of cavalry and the creation of supply centers for horses and war chariots, valuable items at the time. The city of Solomon also became a hub for the commercialization of these military resources. Egypt and other neighboring kingdoms purchased horses and chariots directly from their warehouses. The king therefore not only bought and stored, but resold at a profit. A clear example of commercial arbitrage, where goods are purchased in one region for one price and resold in another for a higher value. This ability to rotate assets and generate passive income from solid structures is reminiscent, in many ways, of the functioning of modern investment funds. Capital is invested in different sectors, with varying risks, but all calculated. The return comes not just from luck, but from the intelligence of mapping opportunities, building reliable partnerships, and maintaining control over the operation as a whole. That's exactly what Solomon did. While many kingdoms depended solely on agricultural production or military strength, Israel multiplied sources of income through trade, diplomacy, infrastructure, and organizational innovation. His wealth, therefore, was not an isolated phenomenon. It was the result of a sophisticated management model where each element fulfilled a complementary function. Fleets did not operate alone, nor did warehouses, nor horse centers, nor international agreements. Everything was part of an integrated body, working with precision like a well-tuned machine. And at the center of it was a king who knew that accumulating wealth was not enough. It was necessary to understand how to make them work in your favor, sustaining the kingdom, strengthening alliances, and projecting power without the constant use of the sword. The material wealth accumulated by Solomon impressed kings and merchants from all over, but there was an element that supported this grandeur in an even more profound way: the wisdom that guided him. Before any gold was brought to Jerusalem, before any alliance was formed, he had made a request that changed the course of his story. Instead of asking for military power, victories, or a long life, Solomon asked for discernment. This choice not only pleased God, it became the foundation upon which everything else would be built. It was this wisdom that shaped his way of seeing the world, his economic decisions, his partnerships, and even his social administration. This principle reveals a pattern that is often ignored. True prosperity begins in the mind. When a clear, Well-founded vision is built and guided by high values. The result tends to be reflected in all areas, including finance. Solomon did not seek wealth as an end, but as a consequence of a solid structure of applied wisdom. He understood that money, in itself, does not support kingdoms. What sustains are well-organized systems, capable people, trustworthy relationships, and a sense of purpose that guides decisions. This sense of purpose manifests itself, for example, in the way he dealt with justice. The recorded story about two women disputing the motherhood of a child shows a king who not only knows the law, but also knows how to interpret it with sensitivity and precision. This same strategic reasoning was transferred to business. When dealing with foreign leaders, Solomon listened, considered, and decided based on data, previous experiences, and risk analysis. He was not impulsive. His mind operated with depth, something that today we would call analytical intelligence. In Scripture, he is also described as someone who observed nature and learned from it. He talked about ants, harvest time, the wind, and human behavior. This shows a mind attentive to the way the world works, someone who saw patterns and drew practical lessons from everything around him. This ability to observe and transform learning into action is one of the foundations of modern financial intelligence. Successful investors, even today, are those who can see beyond the obvious, capture trends, anticipate movements, and act based on principles, not impulses. Solomon applied this not only to trade, but also to the way he dealt with natural resources. He had copper and iron extracted in mountainous regions, used the forests of Lebanon with balance, and treated the soil as something sacred, not just a source to be exploited. This vision of sustainability reveals that his wisdom was not limited to the short term. There was concern about the permanence of what was being built. He knew that kingdoms pass, but the consequences of decisions remain. Therefore, he was careful when making decisions that involved multiple generations. Another notable feature of his management was the appreciation of knowledge. Solomon brought together scribes, wise men, counselors, and experts. He didn't try to know everything himself, but he surrounded himself with minds capable of offering varied perspectives. He was someone who knew how to listen, learn, adjust, and grow from the contributions of others. This willingness to build from the collective strengthened his leadership and made his decisions more balanced. The economic success of his reign was not the product of an isolated mind, but of a network of principled collaboration. Today, many are looking for magic formulas to get rich. Solomon, on the other hand, shows that the true strategy lies in cultivating wisdom, valuing knowledge, building conscious alliances, diversifying without getting lost, and keeping your heart aligned with a greater purpose. He didn't just invest in goods, but in people, structures, and ideas. His focus was not just on how much you could earn, but how much you could sustain over time, without losing the integrity of the system. The balance between spiritual vision and practical competence was the invisible force behind his achievements. And perhaps this is the most valuable lesson. Wealth built with wisdom remains even when time passes.